This next gentleman that we're going to be bringing up, Robert Grant. I met Robert, I think around 4 years ago. I was the senior editor of Forbes Monaco, Forbes Holland. Robert invited me on a trip. I said yes. I didn't even hesitate. And he said, I want you to come to Egypt. I think you need a little magic in your life. I think you need to see the world a little bit differently, from a different lens. He gave me an invitation. I went, and Robert, if you join me on stage, Robert taught me probably one of the biggest lessons about people. It was one day we were on a bus. We were coming back from one of the sites, and you had said, you have a choice. There are two types of people. There are the knowers, and there are the learners. I will never forget that. In that moment in my life, I pivoted to being a learner. So Robert Grant, you have been a business mentor of mine for a number of years. I thank you once again for the trust. Thank you, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dustin. Thank you. So here we are at NASA. It felt like kind of like Disneyland coming in here. I don't know if you guys noticed. But it makes me think about this incredible story from around the time that I was born, actually. I was born in 1969. And the number one song the week I was born was This Is the Dawning of the Age of Aquarius. Let the Sun Shine In by the Fifth Dimension. Funny name for a band. Actually, the Flesh Failures in the Fifth Dimension. And you might remember that the whole Apollo moon mission was, aptly named after the god of the sun, which is interesting because it's the god of the sun going to visit the moon, right? So it's Apollo. And if you noticed, as we came in here, the new moon mission to return back to the moon is now Artemis, right? Which is actually the sister of Apollo. So interesting metaphor all through it. And Artemis is represented by the deer and represented by the moon. So if you've ever noticed that if you look in the sky, the size of the sun is the same as the size of the moon generally. We're the only planet in our solar system that actually has a perfect eclipse. You ever thought about how that could be? Do you know the mathematics that has to come together to make that happen? Well, it happens that the moon has to be, because it's 400 times the diameter of the moon is the diameter of the sun. And so in order for it to have the exact same aspect ratio for us in the sky, then the distance, right, has to also be 400 times the distance. So the distance between the Earth and the moon is about 232,000 miles if you look at aphelion and perihelion. And if you look at the distance all the way to between Earth and the sun, it's about 93 million miles, approximately. That turns out to be exactly 400 times. So the diameter of the sun is 400 times larger than the diameter of the moon, and the distance between Earth and the sun versus Earth and the moon is also 400 times. It's kind of remarkable, isn't it? Therefore, we get a perfect eclipse. Now, you could look at that and say, oh, that's all kind of coincidental. Maybe, but probably not very likely. That we have this beautiful orb in the sky that's golden, and we have another beautiful orb in the sky at night that rules the night that is silver. Has a vibe of alchemy, doesn't it? So we start thinking about the role of consciousness and our universe around us, then you have to start also wondering, are these archetypes representations of the feminine and the masculine? And this is the kind of work that I tend to spend time thinking about philosophically. And I think one of the most important aspects of the world today is that we don't really notice what's going on around us so much. And in order for us to be able to notice things, we have to have voices that can speak out. We live in a world today where free speech is under attack. For the first time in my whole life, free speech is now something in certain circles, in universities even, that is spoken of as a hiss and a byword. And I think it's a major travesty and a massive risk, because you cannot sustain any type of representation or republic without free speech. So that's why I actually created a platform called Orion, Orion is a free speech platform that is decentralized. And the reason why companies today are under so much pressure is because when they look at their servers and they have control over their servers, CEOs like the CEO of Telegram, right, Pavel Durov, end up going to prison in France because he's unable to keep up with the GDPR in Europe, right, which are the requirements for privacy. And the reason why he's got a hard time with it is because everything he's got is on his centralized server. Now, if it were not on a centralized server and it were decentralized for Telegram, then they would have no right to actually put him in jail. That's the way the laws are set up. And yet, also, if his platform was actually encrypted, because for group chats it's not even encrypted, then there would be no way to be able to censor or to monitor what's being said on these platforms, which is a critical aspect as well. So what happens is, in today's world, the Department of Justice or the French Department of Justice and their equivalency will come to a company and say, okay, we know, Telegram, that you've got information. We'd like to be able to have free access to everybody's messaging. This is what happens. So then what happens? The board has a meeting of that company, and the board of directors is there to ensure oversight. And their concern is more about their own personal risk than it is about anything else. So what do they tell the CEO to do? Comply with the request. So the CEO, unless you're Elon Musk, and not many people are Elon Musk, basically have to buckle to what the board tells him to do. That means giving unilateral and free access to all your messaging, or get thrown in jail like has just happened with Pavel. There is a way out of this, though, and it is to have a fully encrypted, quantum secure encryption. And by the way, the encryption we've been using in the world today, the government well knows is not a valid encryption. It's based on prime factorization that is easily cracked. So we have a type of encryption for the government and a different type of encryption for everybody else. And they like that because then they can easily access it, even if someone says, no, we're not going to give you access to it because it's on our server, and I'm going to say no. Even still, they can just apply brute force to crack the encryptions. And as a state actor, that's not so difficult to do. But I believe fundamentally that encryption becomes a critical aspect, especially in a world where today the most valuable asset in the world is your data. And I've just been playing on the new latest version of ChatGPT. Who's been on there yet? Well, think about this. I literally had somebody come up to me this last week. I was up in PEI, Prince Edward Island in Canada, giving a lecture to a bunch of entrepreneurs that are members of this organization called EO. The lecture was on limitlessness. And basically, he told me that he had taken my work, because I'm kind of known in the world mainly for my work in mathematics and geometry and philosophy and physics. And he started making debates with some of the greats in history just to see how I would fare in some of these debates on ChatGPT. So construct a debate, so this is the prompt, construct a debate between Robert Edward Grant, Jordan Peterson, right, Albert Einstein, and Sam Harris on the nature of consciousness and God. Kind of a broad topic. I was stunned, totally stunned at the answers I gave because they were so damn good. And it's exactly what I would have said, like word for word. I was completely blown away. And the reason why it was so accurate is because I've done, just in the last year, over 175 podcasts as a guest, where I'm talking about these things for hours and hours. And so it's got a ton of data to be able to capture on me. But now just imagine, they also can get my image. They also can get my voice. So therefore, it's not just a hypothetical panel. They could recreate a visual panel of me on stage having this exact same conversation. And let's say I'm a consultant that's paid for this type of work. They don't need me anymore. They could recreate my consciousness. So how do I live in a world where my identity, who I am, is literally under threat? And on top of that, no longer having free speech. That's a pretty dystopian, Orwellian view of the world, but it's one that we are already on the precipice of entering. Do you realize this? And the problem is all this data is already out there. They can already do it on all of us. So we have to start to really think about protection of our data. It's vitally important. It needs to be. The only way that it can be accomplished is on decentralized platforms that are fully and very strongly encrypted with quantum secure encryption. And social media is all going to have to move to this paradigm. Are governments really helping us anymore? It's a big question I ask now. I just got back from Burning Man. I was amazed at Burning Man to see how everything actually worked. At Burning Man, here you are in the middle of this dust bowl. It's like the stuff at the bottom of your fireplace. And it's called the playa. And there's 70 to 80,000 people there. There's no water there, so you have to figure out a way to bring it in. There's no electricity, so you have to bring in generators. And yet, even with all the scarcity around, it's one of the most abundant places I've ever been. Everyone just gives you gifts. I think I received like 30 gifts from people, just for the joy of giving gifts. There was no government. There was not even a real police force. There were rangers there. I saw no violence. I saw no fighting. It was a very different experience than anything I'd ever imagined. And it made me start to question the role of governments. Clearly, we see big value with governments in some ways, like NASA. But even NASA now, all these rockets that are getting launched, they're SpaceX. NASA has been subsumed by SpaceX. The only thing NASA is providing is the science, the scientists, and the astronauts, and the locations. But SpaceX could do it on their own as well. Make no mistake. So I'm at this stage in life where I'm really questioning a lot of things, and I want to be able to have the right to continue to question. The only way that we can create a path for a future is by beginning with the end in mind, as we just heard. In 1962, John F. Kennedy said, "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do these other things, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the very best of our energies and skills, because that task is one we're willing to accept, one that we're unwilling to postpone, and one that we intend to win." That clarion call set the stage. Before the end of that decade, it had to be in 1969. How do you go to the moon? How exactly do you go to the moon? You begin with the end in mind. If we're going to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth, we're going to need what? A gravity boot. That's what they started with. They worked backwards. Begin with the end in mind. So as we think about the future that we want to cut, exactly the role that we will play in that future, and what type of rulers or overlord structures or infrastructures we need to be able to innovate, if we're not intentional about it, it's just going to eat us. And just like in companies, I don't care how great your strategy is, culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you're not deliberate about what you intend to create, don't be surprised when it creates you and it controls you. You know, I often am inspired by Nelson Mandela and the fact that he spent, 27 years in prison as a political prisoner. And the only thing that kept him going every day was to read this poem by William Ernest Henley that was written in 1875. Out of the night that covers me, black is the pit from pole to pole. I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloodied, yet unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade. And yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Thank you very much.